Hey, welcome to the Conservative Caucus podcast. It's Jim Pfaff, president of the Conservative Caucus. And I just wrapped up a talk with Eva Andrade, a friend of mine who runs Hawaii Family Forum. It's focused on the Family Associated Family Policy Council. We used to actually be Family Policy Council directors together, and we hadn't talked for some time, and it was good to get together. We have a free rolling conversation, mostly about what's going on with conservative social issues, family formation issues, and, life, family, and marriage topics, and taking place both federally and in Hawaii. This is a really key discussion about some of these really serious issues that are taking place. So I think you're going to enjoy this a lot. To connect with us, go to our website, www.theconservativecaucus.org. That's THE, theconservativecaucus.org. And you can send us a message there. Any guests you want to hear, send us an email at info@theconservativecaucus.org and let us know who you'd like us to talk to. I know a lot of people in DC and in the conservative movement, and we'll certainly bring a lot of them on, but who would you like to hear from? Or any topics you want us to cover. Let us know something specific about what you think we could address that's really important to you. This is critical as we develop this show, and we want your insight. While you're at our website, be sure to check out all of our resources on boots on the ground lobbying tips in your state, rebuttals to Democrat weirdo ideas. We have a citizen action kit there, and we have our TCCA, the Citizen Action Center, where we train you how to do grassroots politics and get involved in your local area. You just got to sign up. Go to the top right-hand side so you can sign up there. So with that, here's my conversation with Eva Andrade of Hawaii Family Forum. Hey, welcome everyone to the Conservative Caucus podcast with my somewhat long-lost friend, Eva Andrade. She runs the Hawaii Family Forum, and has been a focus on the Family Associated Family Policy Council. Of course, I founded the Colorado Family Institute back in the day after I was working at Focus on the Family. And further back, I don't know if I ever told you this, Eva, but I used to work with Indiana Family Institute back in the 90s when Bill Smith was running it. So Bill was an early mentor of mine. And but I've been involved in the pro-life, pro-family movement for a long time, Eva, just about as long, I would say. When did you first get involved in the pro-life, pro-family movement, would you say?
Well, I've been doing this for a really long time. So I was actually hired to do this very thing for the Catholic Diocese in 1994. And we are the only family policy council that has a formal association with the State Catholic Conference. So I wear both hats. So not only am I the director, right? I'm also the executive.
Oh, I didn't know you still were. Oh, that's great. Okay. I apologize. That's my bad.
No, that's good. So 94 was when I was hired by the Hawaii Catholic Conference. But then in 2001, I was kind of if you want to use that term, stole by the Hawaii Family Forum when Kelly Rosati was our executive director. And that
was knew Kelly well. She was great. Yep.
And that was in 2001, and I've never left. So
that's great. Oh, good. So it's been a long, and so let me give the very quick resume. As you mentioned, you're with the Hawaii Catholic Conference as well. Have you been executive director of it since 2019? You were just working with it beforehand. Is that true, or?
Right. So this is typical of anybody who's in the movement, right? You start off at maybe, at one level, and then you end up at another. So I was doing communications, I was doing administration, and then kind of you're there and you end up, you look around and you're like, wait, how did I get into this position? Yeah,
exactly. It's crazy. I always would tell when I was working as a chief of staff in both Thomas Massey and Tim Hulskamp's office, I used to always tell these young people who wanted to work with us, maybe as an intern or something else, and they had a political science major. I said, is it too late to change it? It's like, why would you even want to do that? Like, go live a real life and then come back into it if you want to. Neither of us seem seem to have chosen that, and it's kind of interesting. But you have extensive experience in public policy, education, research, advocacy, especially on marriage protection, child welfare, and opposition to doctor-assisted suicide, which is, and we'll get into this later, maybe if it's appropriate, but big issue in Hawaii. Oregon and Hawaii in particular have been known for that issue. I guess, and you're originally from Pearl City, Hawaii. You're a native Hawaiian, and that's really important for people to know, because Hawaii's kind of a different bird, isn't it? I mean, when it comes to these sorts of things, there are a lot of things that are quite similar too, but it's really kind of a different environment. Maybe let's start off with that. What's it like doing pro-life, pro-family work in Hawaii, and how do you perceive it as different from other parts of the country?
Yes. So just small corrections. So yes, I've been in Hawaii my whole life. I am what you call a kama'aina, which means that I am born and raised in Hawaii, but I am not native Hawaiian.
Right.
You know, Hawaiian is an actual.
I'm glad you made that distinction. That's my bad.
Yeah.
I did know that. Thank you. Yeah.
No, yeah. And so, I definitely, this place is my home, and I've been here forever. And you're absolutely right on the way we deal with politics. Here in Hawaii, I know we say it all the time, and I always feel bad. Hawaii is a beautiful place. And when people come here and they experience the aloha here, and that's really what we hear, right? Whenever people come in, wow, the people in Hawaii are just so full of love and welcoming. That really is part of the culture here in Hawaii. So even if you're on different ends of the political spectrum, you're going to find yourself sitting right next to the person. In fact, one of the stories I love to tell is during one of the hearings back in the early days of Hawaii Family Forum, I was sitting right next to the lobbyist for Planned Parenthood. And, we were kind of, you have those vibes, you're sitting next to the enemy. And just in that process of sitting next to them, she asked me what school I graduated. And that's a big question here in Hawaii. I mean, people don't care like what college you went to. They want to know what high school you went to. And so a big question here in Hawaii is, hey, where are you in grad? And then when you tell them where you graduated, that's kind of how they place you. And so that came up in our conversation. And I told her, I grad from Star of the Sea, and she graduated from Star of the Sea school as well.
Yeah.
So even though we were on opposite ends of the spectrum, there was a certain respect that kind of came up because we both graduated from the same school. And that's kind of how we roll here. It's really interesting. You can't be too activist related when you go down to the Capitol. You have to stand firm for sure on your positions, and people know where you're at. But you have to realize that you're going to be actually at the Capitol on the same side as some of these people on other issues that we face here. So it's a very interesting dynamic.
That's a similar dynamic in a way, although there's some other dissimilarities, but that's similar to me as a native Hoosier. I always tell people I'm from Indianapolis. We run a little race there you might have heard of, but centered around basketball. So I grew up in one class basketball in Indiana, and you always identified with your high school wherever you were, because at every level of skill and accomplishment in the state tournament. But you did. So anyone that's seen the movie Hoosiers, like, it's very, very much like, that was in the 50s, but it's very, very much like what my wife and I grew up with. So this connection you had talked about with the enemy is something very similar to my wife was really very successful at. So she ran a crisis pregnancy center in Bloomington, Indiana, where Indiana University is. Like one of the most, in fact, it's actually the most Democrat county in the state, or at least one of them, and radical pro-abortion activism in Bloomington. Yet she had this crisis pregnancy center where she built a maternity home for young women who were pregnant, single, in crisis, maybe didn't have a place to live, could get a little bit of doctor care to the volunteer doctors. But she was able to build relationships with the very radical pro-abort women mayors of this city. And it's really interesting how there was firmness, there was opposition, but but they really respected her, and she was able to get a lot of done. And I always tell her how much I admire her because she saved probably hundreds of babies, affected that many or more women's lives in some way or another. It was so you can do this now here in the mainland. I think you need to be much more aggressive, frankly, because it's the only way we're going to win some of these battles. Donald Trump does a really good job of opposing hard, and you can disagree with this or that way or one part of it that he does, but that pushback has been really, really necessary. But nonetheless, we still have to recognize that this is a human endeavor. I always tell people, this politics thing would be easy if I didn't have to deal with people. It's a pretty crazy thing, and you still have to show the love of God and really have a heart for people while at the same time knowing how to push back hard. So, that's really interesting dynamic you bring up.
No, it is important. And, this is one of the things we always say. There is a time to rise up, and there is a time to rally, and there is a time to show up in force. And we've done that. Hawaii Family Forum organized one of the most successful rallies in Hawaii's history during the same-sex marriage. We had thousands upon thousands of people that showed up. It did not make a lick of difference in the end. The legislature still did what they were going to do. And it was interesting because, some of the feelings of being beat up by the community back then, or not by the community, but in the community, we still feel it today. A lot of pastors felt like they rallied their troops, they got them out there, and then we lost the battle. And the same thing happened a few years later with assisted suicide. And so there was a spirit of, where people just didn't want to fight anymore. And we've really felt it in the church, and less people were showing up at the Capitol. That's starting to change now. COVID, we can talk forever about some of the bad stuff about COVID, but some of the good stuff that came out of COVID was that people started to rise up again. People started to awaken to really see what the government was doing.
Well, and I don't know. That's a good segue into some of these things. I don't know how much you're noticing it, but have you read Megan Basham's book Shepherds for Sale? Have you read that book?
It's on my pile. We all have that reading pile. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I've become acquainted with Megan, and she's going through a big cancer issue right now, so she's a little bit off the trail. But that is a very important thing to note, because one dynamic is we've lost again in a tough state, and that certainly is going to bring some dispiriting sentiment to people. But there's also this injection, and it's in evangelical churches and Catholic churches, this injection of some pretty progressive ways of thinking on these key social issues. I mean, I've maintained for a lot of years that if your theology is bad, your anthropology is going to be horrible as well too. We
Absolutely.
are twisting and turning on its head everything that has to do with what a man and a woman is, what childbirth and marriage are, both to individuals and to a culture. These are the things that are breaking down. And when you break these things down, you take away many of the fundamental foundations of what makes a society healthy and prosperous potentially. Notwithstanding the fact that, in terms of like homosexuality or transgenderism, you're still going to have people like that in a culture if marriage and family are strong. But when you extract marriage and family out of the equation, it makes things horrible, because those lifestyles cannot build a long-term culture by their very definition. At least the definition that we know is there, even though some try to make that definition quite different. I mean, do you see that as well?
I do. In fact, I listened to the podcast that you did with my counterpart, Victoria, and, you talked about that. What we're dealing with really is the destruction of the very crux of the family, the stronghold that used to be there because you had a committed man and a woman, there you had the complementary of the sexes, right, in the relationship, raising these strong children in committed relationships that have changed the dynamic of of what we're fighting. In fact, a lot of these issues that we're seeing at the Capitol, we're seeing these younger progressive legislators who were not raised in that same strong, committed relationships that are now taking us outside of all the definitions that we fought and died for. And the sad thing is, I don't know if you're seeing this across the nation, I believe that you probably are, is that it's trickling its way into some of the churches.
Yeah.
And so now you have pastors who are afraid to come out and say things because, well, I noticed that when I preach against abortion, my donations go down. I don't want to be condemning to women who have made that choice. And it's really interesting, when I have these conversations with people, I'm like, okay, so if you're talking to an alcoholic, and this person is suffering, do you treat it the same way? Or are we now, taking what we're calling sin and putting it into different categories when it used to be that sin was sin, right? And I think now I'm sorry, I know I kind of took that off, but that's what we're dealing with at the legislative level, right? Is not only are we fighting legislators who don't see family the way that we see family, they don't read definitions the way we read definitions, but we're seeing the same thing in the church. One of the issues we're fighting right here in Hawaii is gambling. And I cannot tell you, see, Hawaii is like Utah. We're only one of 2 states that have no form of legalized gambling.
Right.
We're fighting this issue. And I cannot believe how many Christians are emailing me or calling me saying, why are you working so hard on this issue? There's other issues out there you should be fighting. And again, it's the trickling in of some of these worldly beliefs that we're fighting in all directions. And I think that makes our work today far more challenging.
No, I agree with you. And in fact, when I consider, and I was raised Catholic, but I'm in the evangelical community for the majority of my adult life. I think that in both areas, the number one thing for a church to do is not to make sure that they raise a lot of money or worry about when the money's not there, because we're supposed to be trusting in faith in the Lord to provide those things. What we're called to do, what churches are called to do, is one major thing, and that is to build disciples of Jesus Christ. And that effort doesn't happen already, in part because of these worries about the finances that are natural with any nonprofit organization. You and I have experienced it many times in our years of work on the political end of things or the public policy end. But more importantly, creating disciples is what matters, because ultimately it's about the advancement of the gospel. And that's what this progressive move, another thing this progressive move into the church has been doing. Now, I think the Catholic Church has dealt with it for a longer period of time than the evangelical movement has, because you've had a much larger and more institutional aspect of things. So you get these factions in different parts of the world. They seep into the culture of the organization more directly because of the institutional nature of it. Whereas in the Protestant community, you could shove people off to the side, maybe in various denominations. But the reality is that this has always been there. You read scripture and it's always been part of the church. There always have been false teachers, false prophets, and we need to work against that. But more importantly, you got to have disciples who understand how to live the life themselves and how to translate that into culture. And that doesn't always mean politics, but politics is a big part of that, particularly in a country whose constitution, which every bit of it is legal language, the Constitution says we the people in order to form a more perfect union. In other words, this idea of popular sovereignty that we all heard about in school when we were learning history, but kind of forgot about because the 2 words are kind of 12th grade words. And so maybe it just kind of passed over us. But popular sovereignty is that the citizens are the kings, not the kings, not the leaders. And because we've forgotten this idea, we're seeing this overwhelming stuff. So, and we're going to touch on a couple issues of that before we end here, but we see that overwhelming thing coming, and the Christian church is just not advancing that as well as it used to. I mean, you and I remember the religious right days in the late 90s, and we were at a high water point. Dr. Dobson was ubiquitous in being out there, Chuck Colson, others. And you had John Paul II, who was a fabulous Pope was really out there, and these things were cranking in the political and public policy realm. And then this injection of progressivism, which is very purposeful, as Megan Basham lays out. That I think that's, we've got to tell people that's got to change, it seems to me. Do you agree?
I totally agree. And I was getting all fired up when I was listening to that interview that you did with Victoria, because, well, I've known Victoria as you for a long time. And we hear where we see a lot of behind the scenes things that people don't see. Right. So as we're fighting all these battles, people on the outside are just watching us, put out all the fires that we're having to put out. But what they don't see is the internal struggles that we're having because of that very burden that we're carrying. We're not just preaching the gospel of Jesus, in our messaging. We have to live it, because we want to change lives, not only of the people in our states, but in the building, our Capitol buildings. And they're going to see Jesus in how we react and how we bring that message to the Capitol. And plus our families. I mean, the attack that we have in our own families, it's so funny. None of us live the perfect life.
No.
It's not like, well, maybe there's a few out there, we have some great family policy leaders out there. And maybe there are a few that can brag about this, but most of us have broken families, and we're watching all of this stuff we're talking about that's creeping down, that legislators are passing, that they think they're doing the right thing, all because of money, like gambling, right? Gambling and the recreational marijuana. It's all about money. We got to bring money into the state, but we're watching the destruction of families. We're seeing it for ourselves. It's such a burden that we all carry.
It really is. Well, so in Hawaii, and you alluded to it earlier, you have some serious issues happening. And it seems to me, 2 points I want to make and throw it to you, but it seems to me that Hawaii has not always been a state, although mostly Democrat and liberal in politics as far back as the 60s, pretty consistently, or maybe before. Almost from the founding, I guess that means. But anyway, it hasn't been so much of an anti-family environment legislatively there. And that in recent years, because of what's happening with the radical leftists in the Democrat Party in general and the expectations that come with that, it's been happening more. And you recently, we've already got Obergefell. So homosexual marriage is now part of the law here in the United States. And yet Hawaii and Colorado and California have done the same thing, all went ahead and enshrined it legally. You had a constitutional amendment, in fact, I think, on the ballot with that, right? So tell people about that.
Yeah, our constitution amendment was a little weird. So, this was the issue that I cut my teeth on when I was first hired. The same-sex marriage issue started in Hawaii in 91 with some court cases, right? And then the decision in 94. So my whole early time was all about same-sex marriage. And it's really funny when you think about it, because back in those days, churches, they knew what marriage was, and they would fight for marriage. One man, one woman. I knew people in the gay community who used to say marriage was, a man and a woman, we'll let them have that, and how everything has changed. But what our constitutional amendment did when we passed it in 98, and it was overwhelmingly passed, it gave the legislature the power to reserve marriage to opposite sex couples. So that's the wording that was in our constitution. So what happened last year is they struck that out, and what's really weird about that is we gave the legislature the power to reserve marriage to opposite sex couples, but we didn't say they had to.
Right.
So there was really no need for the constitutional amendment to be messed with. But obviously it bothered it just bothered people that should, the federal government ever overturn its marriage decision and that's what they were saying. We look what happened with Roe. This could happen again with marriage. So we need to be prepared. So basically now that because that language is removed, we do have same-sex marriage protected in our Constitution.
Yeah. It's really, I ran the marriage amendment in Colorado, as you know, when we were trying to decide how we were going to approach it, we flew up to Oregon because they had passed a marriage amendment the year before. This was 2006 when I went, but 2005 is when they passed theirs. So as we were setting up the Colorado effort in 2006, we went up and talked with the folks there. And I hadn't realized it before that, but there was actually a homosexual couple that had done an ad that said, yeah, we support the marriage amendment. I mean, we've been able to go and make arrangements for ourselves so that a lot of those key things are there, but they said they believed in marriage, and that really was actually, it wasn't ubiquitous within the homosexual community necessarily, but it was a strong sense of, well, yeah, marriage is marriage. It's like, just let us, have some significant part of our relationship there. And it's amazing how that shift has changed, how it's shifted away from that.
Yeah, all they wanted, back then is they wanted to be able to visit each other in hospital rooms and have, legal rights bestowed on them. And so Hawaii did something really interesting back then. We actually passed a reciprocal beneficiaries law.
Yep.
Because and this is the other thing, the Christians get a bad community, a bad rap about things. But I have to laugh. Most of the things that we say no to, we're doing a lot of work in the churches on the saying yes. Right.
Yeah.
So, yes, we say we don't want abortion, but most of the churches are providing some kind of care for women that are making that journey when they face an unplanned pregnancy. Yeah. We say no to assisted suicide, but how many churches are rising to the work of caring for the elderly when they're making that journey right towards the end of their life? Poverty. Right. It's churches that rise when people need help for rent and groceries. And yes, the Catholic Church gets a lot of attention on that, but so do the Protestant evangelical churches. We're seeing. So while people are focusing that the church is this big negative, everything you guys fight is no, no, no. And I always have to educate people. Well, it's true. We're at the Capitol saying no to things because we're busy in the churches doing the yes.
Yeah. Well, and I've argued for many years that the federal government mostly, but actually all government in this country has a monopoly on charity. Like just like they have a monopoly on education. And as you and I know, there are a lot of, Catholic churches that have schools, and there are Protestant churches that do too. But that's just a tiny, tiny portion of education in this country. It's a government monopoly on education. It's a government monopoly on welfare as well too. And I was just reading, I've been reading through 1 Timothy recently, and I was just reading 1 Timothy 5 today, and all this discussion about how to deal with widows and how you deal with various things like that. And what Paul was trying to address there is this effort in churches, like all churches that were established right after the resurrection of Christ and the establishment of the church. They all had communities together, and they all were contributing to the care of people who were poor, needy, and in the case of widows and orphans. And that's why the whole term widows and orphans came into James, because the church always had this in a significant way within its own, under its own auspices. And yet we've thrown all that to the government. One of my big arguments with this progressive movement is when I say we don't need government welfare. I mean, government can maybe do a safety net, and that's fine, but government welfare is not necessary. And it's not commanded in scripture, but you have this progressive movement saying, no, it's got to have the USAID thing is one good example. So we're supposed to throw all of our money out to try to fix countries that can never be fixed and figure out how we're going to pay for all that. And we're commanded in scripture to do that? No, that's what the church is supposed to do. That's the church's job. And if they didn't take so much money away from us in taxes, we could probably do it more efficiently, to be candid. And we've got a charitable nation. But this is an important aspect of what we're dealing with. And you're right. That has an effect on public policy, in part because we don't, as you say, let people know how much we're doing it or make it very clear. But the other side of that is maybe we aren't even really doing it to the extent that we should.
No, you've hit the nail. And so that's what I'm finding. And to me, that's been one of the greatest blessings of this partnership we have here with the evangelical Protestants and Catholics is that because of the role of Hawaii Family Forum kind of doing this bridge, everybody knows what everybody's doing. And so there's a little bit of a healthy competition, because, everybody wants to help, and everybody, and this is true probably across the board in every state, is that we care about our communities. Yeah. And sometimes just being aware of what's happening in the community is enough to motivate action, because a lot of times, and I understand this, I watch it, pastors are so busy. You know, if you ask a pastor what their day looks like and they tell you, and then you're like, well, why aren't you at the Capitol when these bills are coming out? You know, and it's like, you know, when they're doing marriage prep and they're trying to do their budgets and they're having their elders meetings and all the millions of things that pastors have to do. And they do try as much as they can. And I think that we have to get better at giving each other grace. People are gifted differently. People that show up at the Capitol, you've got your groups of people that are gifted at doing that. They will get down there and they are eloquent speakers and they're not afraid to stand in front of the legislature and give these 1-minute speeches, because that's how much time we're given at the legislature to do testimony, 1 to 3 minutes. They can do, you know, eloquently. You've got other people that would never step foot at the state capitol, but they are praying 24 hours a day. You've got people that are just there to provide support to legislators who are standing firm on these issues. So it's like we have to give each other more grace, and not everybody's gifted the same way. And I think that and I'm talking mostly for Hawaii. So as I'm saying this, I want you to know that the judgment is pointing back at ourselves, is that we have to really do a better job at putting the right people, as one of our pastors say, putting the right people on the bus and seated in the right seats on the bus.
Yeah. Listen, I think your principle is applicable everywhere. I've been thinking a lot about Ephesians 6, and everyone, it's used often to say, we're fighting against principalities and powers of darkness. You don't go in and get in people's faces at the legislature. And I've been recently talking about, no, actually it does mean that. That's why you need to put the armor on, because you need to be going in and doing battle in the culture generally, or in your community right where you're at, but sometimes in the political realm. But that battle in the spiritual realm through prayer does need to happen too. And everybody needs to be involved with that. And we need to encourage it, and then show how it connects in to the face-to-face battle that takes place. Because let's be honest, the Democrat Party, and I know that there are some Democrats that aren't quite this bad, and I get that, but the Democrat Party at the national level really is pushing evil. It's not just that they have a political difference with Republicans or conservatives or however that faction is. It's not that they have mere political differences, and in some areas that's the case, but they're actually pushing an agenda that removes liberty, the constitutional liberty that we have, that removes a judicial system that is fair and honest, and blind lady justice, that exists less and less anymore. And they will shut down your ability to speak, your ability to communicate. They'll take it away from you if they can. These are serious and very evil issues, and they are in that spiritual realm. That is a huge spiritual battle that has to be undertaken by people of faith that really believe that realm exists. And by the way, people, even atheists, are starting to see that exists more and more. But this is a big part of what we need to be doing.
No, it really is. And you hit the nail on the head, because see, here in Hawaii, one of the issues that we're tracking this year that really caused a major uproar, and you kind of touched on this earlier, was the because of the rise in measles and all that stuff that's going on. You've got Hawaii is a very strongly Democratic state. And so most of the time when we're at the legislature, we're saying no. There's very few times that we're at the Capitol saying yes. And so we do look like these people that, oh my gosh, these people, are they ever happy? Which is why we have to do the message about the things we're doing in the community. But so what the legislature wanted to do this year, and our governor, who is he is a doctor, and he's done a lot of interviews nationally, so a lot of people recognize our Governor Green. They're really pushing vaccinations. And so in Hawaii during the COVID lockdown, a lot of people were opting out of the vaccinations for religious reasons, right? And so now we have our leaders in government going, oh, no, we can't have that. We've got to do all these mandatory vaccination things, especially with the rise in measles and all that stuff that's happening. And so they were going to remove the religious exemption for vaccinations. And you know what's interesting? The past few years, we're fighting the expansion of assisted suicide, the expansion of abortion, the expansion of LGBT rights and all that. And a few Christians show up at the Capitol, but all of a sudden the vaccination issue comes, and thousands of people showed up at the Capitol to testify. So when you have the government that steps in and they're taking away rights, especially when it comes to our religious freedoms, that's when you see the people saying enough is enough. Now, of course, we're trying to get them to say, no, all those issues are important. We need you at all those other issues. But it was interesting to see the dichotomy on the effort on the vaccinations when we compared it to some of our other issues.
Oh, there's no doubt. By the way, that's a good segue into something we were talking about just before. Massachusetts, and this is I'm looking at an article from April 14th, 2025, if for those who might see this much later than we're doing it. Massachusetts Department of Children and Families is under fire for taking custody of 5 children after a pediatrician reported their parents for allegedly refusing to vaccinate their 9-month-old baby due to their religious beliefs. Homeschooling parents Israel Rivera and Ruth Encarnacion were later arrested for familial kidnapping, quote unquote, last month when they fled to Texas to escape DCF. Okay. So, I mean, this is exactly where this issue is going. By the way, having religious exemptions, I think there should be a religious exemption, but please, there should just be an exemption, period. We should not be requiring these things of parents. And most parents, they think that citizens are dumb. We got to tell you what to do because you're too dumb to figure it out. No, there were no requirements for vaccinations, I guarantee you 80 plus, maybe 85, maybe 90% of parents are going to do some vaccination schedule. And by the way, we might find better vaccination schedules that are more relevant. But certainly for those who have some concern, you should be able to back away. This hepatitis B vaccine that they wanted to give this child, like hepatitis B, you only get it through sharing needles if you're a drug addict or sexual relations. It never transmits any other way than that, and yet we're giving it to newborn babies. It's absolutely crazy what's going on in this area, and nuts that these nanny state government people, both Republican and Democrat, by the way, mostly Democrats maybe, but there's some Democrats, but Republicans are as bad about this too. They want this to be foisted upon parents, and it is a threat to their liberties, an absolute threat.
I know. And I think we have to cool our jets a little bit. What I'm noticing in these conversations too is that what has happened because of all of this is that people have drawn a line in the sand that was not necessary to be drawn, right? We're hearing conversations on vaccinations now where people who used to be reasonable about vaccinations are now anti-vax on everything. Like they will never again get any kind of vaccinations. And then you have people on the other end of the spectrum that are saying, oh no, we have to force vaccinations on everybody. And, simply having parents have they're supposed to be the ones who make the decisions for their kids, right, and be educated, and they do it. If a mother does not want her daughter, who's 11 years old, to get vaccinated for the HPV vaccination because her daughter is nowhere near sexually active right now, that mother should be allowed to make that decision. If somebody doesn't want to take the vaccination for, even like you said, health reasons. Look, I just don't want it because I'm worried that I'm going to have an effect. So now what has happened, right, is that people can't talk to each other anymore. And maybe I'm just being Pollyanna here, but when I first started in this line of work, people were far more willing to sit down and have conversations, even if they walked away in disagreement after. I do not see that anymore. It has gotten to the point where both sides are guilty of silencing each other by using talking points, just talking points. They're not having true conversation. I mean, am I crazy? Am I like far out in left field? I
think you're absolutely right. And I'm involved or have been, recent months have been a little challenged, but I've been involved with X Spaces quite a bit, had a lot of discussions there, working in spaces that weren't just people on the right who were talking to each other. I've been getting those too, but really having engagement with people on the left as well. And it is a real challenge. Like just to use rational discussion, like to throw out a rational argument that hits well. It's like, I think by the way, from an apologetic standpoint as Christians, like the approach to, as Peter told us we should do in 1 Peter, defend the faith, have an answer for those who ask. The role of apologetics is not to persuade. It's to convince with facts, and it's not to get people to change. That's got to happen. You're going to have a time when you're winning the argument, and you have the best argument, and someone else doesn't, and you may even be right, but you're losing the argument because someone's arguing better than you are. But you still have to have that engagement. We don't have a basis for that much anymore. I think X Spaces has helped out a little bit, but I remember I got involved with X Spaces early on when Musk had purchased Twitter. And it was wide open debate, people of varying different opinions, all gathering together and talking. And you're seeing those things sort of split apart because people can't tolerate one another, and they don't want to make cogent debates. They don't want to have their facts down. I mean, we need to be on the right if we believe and that are pro-family, traditionalist, and understand what truth is. I mean, Jesus said, I came to bear witness of the truth. You know, people that believe what truth is, if that's what you believe, then you need to be really good at explaining that. You need to learn how to do that well. Wherever you do it, like people like us do it in the public eye. Some people just need to do it with their family and friends, but you still need to learn how to do it. And until that changes, we're not going to be able to advance the kind of debates that we need to have. Now, by the way, on that point, there's something that happened. I want you to explain it to me because I found out about it when I was preparing. But there was recently a big issue about what are called good news clubs being able to go into schools there, because I think this kind of fits in this part of what we're talking about here. Give a little background to what that situation was, what happened legislatively and otherwise, and in the media related to it, and what was the end result of that?
Yeah. So actually, all of this kind of started back in 2013, but it came to a head during COVID. So what happened was the way that our system works here in Hawaii is that, so the good news clubs were wanting to meet, obviously, to use the public schools. And our public school systems, they weren't consistent in what they were doing. They would charge some they wouldn't charge, some they wouldn't let use the facilities at all. And then COVID happened. And then all of a sudden, when they weren't allowing anybody to use the facilities, and right after COVID, when these good news clubs went back to the schools, suddenly they weren't allowing any of the clubs to use the school campuses, this whole separation of church. It was absolutely ridiculous. And of course, so, there was an immediate lawsuit about that because you can't do that. And and they won. But what's interesting now is so fast forward to today, and now you've got people complaining that the state is going to have to use taxpayer funds to pay off the lawsuit. And I'm thinking, you're mad about that? When I think the question should have been asked. And you know what? This kind of ties in, so just bear with me for a sec. So several years ago, we had the legislature here wanted to pass a bill that was going to force pregnancy centers. We only have 6 in the state of Hawaii, but to post abortion-related information. And one of our centers is on church property, right? So we had an ADF attorney at the time that did a lot of religious freedom for us. And he would go to the Capitol.
By the way, so people know what that is.
Yes. Go ahead. Sorry, all these acronyms. And his name was Jim Hochberg, and he a longtime ally with us. He would go to the Capitol, literally sit there and tell the legislators, if you pass this, I'm going to sue you. If you pass this, I'm going to sue you. So, of course, they passed it. And, of course, he sued them. And there was the case happening in California at the same time and all that. And so when we're down at the Capitol on these issues, as with the Good News Club and stuff like this, we're telling them, you cannot do this. If you do this, we're going to sue you. So we tell the state ahead of time, don't do this because you're going to lose. And then you're going to have to use taxpayer money. Jim Hochberg said one of the greatest feelings he had in his life was getting that check, from the state of Hawaii, because it was absolutely ridiculous that they passed this kind of law. But it's very important that when you're down at the Capitol and you're making these cases, that you have all this documentation, because now when the state is complaining, well, we're going to use taxpayer dollars, we're like, we warned you. We
Yeah.
absolutely warned you that this was going to happen. So if you're going to blame anybody, blame your legislators.
Two fundamental principles in American politics and law. One is related to this church and state issue. And I mean, gosh, how often have we had to repeat this? This modern idea of separation in church and state is twisting a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to Baptists in Rhode Island. And he claimed that wall of separation was to keep government out of the church and not the
church out of the government. I know. We have that joke here, our Catholic and Baptist brethren, we always say, let's blame the Baptists.
Yeah.
If the Baptists had not raised their little head and been mad, and if I'm not mistaken, I think that the question they were asking was because of the Catholic influence at the time.
I do think there was some Catholic stuff in there, but
so we just go, see, now if you all had just, if we had done what the Bible said and you took your problem directly to your brother, maybe we wouldn't have had a letter from the president that caused.
For those who know the history, if you hadn't left Maryland and gone up to Maryland, for those who don't know, Maryland was originally a Catholic colony primarily. So, but but our founding fathers understood this, like there are doctrinal issues that churches can deal with, but that religious liberty was for everybody. You had George Washington writing a letter to a Jewish community that was very, very thankful and kind to them, even though he himself was an Episcopalian and a Protestant and certainly had theological differences. But that we actually really did have that for the most part in this country. And you had citizens who would fight or get mad or whatever. But that was the whole reason. Like, that's the purpose for the First Amendment. So to read the First Amendment, people need to, it's like you got to say this over and over again. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. Okay, we get that. But for them, that means establishment of any kind of religious activity. No, that means don't have a national state sanctioned church. That's what that means, which is liberty, FYI. It's where we get the word anti-disestablishmentarianism, by the way, which is the longest thing in the longest word in the English language because of the establishment of church. It was this whole concept of establishing a state church. But then, so anyway, so no establishing of a church or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, the second part of that clause of the Constitution, which means be a Christian everywhere. I mean, you can be any religious faith everywhere. That's what it provides for. And so this concept is just really twisted. But here's the other problem we have is that, and this goes to the cases you're talking about, we don't have courts that are ruling justly right now, which FYI is a biblical concept.
Do not get me started on that. We're under the Ninth Circuit, and everybody, it's the Ninth Circuit infamous rulings.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's crazy, and Congress needs to deal with that issue. It's just absolutely crazy. I don't have too much time with you, but I'm going to tell you this. I want to get to, because there's so much more to talk about, and we'll probably do this again sometime. I just want to get to some macro issues here then, and from your perspective, even in Hawaii, but as an American, and we're just going through all these things together, what do you see happening in the direction of the country? You compare it if you want with what was going on in the Biden administration, which was just horrific, but importantly, now that Trump's been elected, and it's not like Trump is our savior or anything. I mean, I support the guy and very wholeheartedly, but shoot, I don't worship the guy. He's a human being, just like the rest.
Nor should we.
That's right. So for everyone that agrees with Eva and me out there, what we're saying is if you're kind of worshiping him, stop, because that's not what's going to get anything done. Go on principles. But anyway, what do you see happening right now in the United States? 85 to 86 days as of this recording into the Trump presidency. What do you see, and where do you think we're going from here?
Well, I definitely, I know that there are a lot of people in the movement that are probably way more, in Hawaii, we call it akamai, which means knowledgeable about this kind of stuff, and would probably have, this deep views of politically where we're going. What I see happening, we touched a little bit on this, is that the polarization of our nation has never been as bad as, in my opinion, as it is right now, even among church-going people. People that supported Trump are now starting to question their support of him because of some of the things he's doing, like with the tariffs and maybe some of the decisions they're making. I've got people that didn't support him that are now taking a step back. I mean, Bill Mayer's a great example of that, right? People that don't normally see him in a certain light are starting to look at him like, oh, maybe this guy's got something to say. But I think that if we can all, and maybe, back in the 70s, we used to say, take a chill pill. If we could get everybody to just relax for a minute and, like you said, look at Trump as an individual who's trying his best according to his own. If you read everything he's written or things that he said publicly, that he's really trying to make America better. And I mean, that's why he picked the whole, make America great. This is what he's working toward. And he truly believes that that's what he's doing. To attack people personally, whether it's President Trump doing it or Democrats doing it to Republicans or Republicans doing it to Democrats, we really have to take a step back and remember that people are people. I get just as frustrated as most people when somebody's talking and some talking head says something that is just, it's just so unchristian and it's so unnecessary. And why did we suddenly do this? I mean, what was happening recently where all the Democrats were suddenly swearing in all their talking points? It was like,
I've never heard the F word more in my life, and it's used a lot in this country.
Yeah. I mean, here in Hawaii, again, we're very strong Democratic controlled state. And I remember some of our elderly Japanese supporters who are strong Democrats saying, this is not the Democratic Party I remember.
Yeah.
And to be honest, this is not the Republican Party that most people remember either, And I think so, asking where we're going, I do think that we're going to hit some major bumpy roads based on what Trump is trying to accomplish for the economy. And you can listen to all the warnings that are out there. But I just caution everybody to take a step back, because we'll be able to look at this in a few months and see whether it's working or not. And if it's not working, truly not working, then I believe that our leaders in government are going to take a step back and say, this is not working. I mean, Trump is not afraid. The one thing about Trump, whether you like him or not, is the guy is not afraid to change his thought, mid-stride, if he needs to do it.
No doubt about it. In fact, there was a growing problem although it was far less problematic for the American people at the time, but when Andrew Jackson became president, there was beginning this problem of government really getting a bit out of hand, and he went boldly after it, and it was a raucous time. But he ended up fixing a few things as well too, and he, with all of his imperfections, and he had some. But Ronald Reagan, who more graciously did all this stuff, he really began sort of turning things around also. And I really see Donald Trump as fulfilling much of the Reagan vision. There are a lot of people say, I hear some people, young people say, Reagan was a rhino, whatever that means. And or they didn't like him for some reason because they don't know about him. But no, Ronald Reagan was amazing. He just had no ability to do what Trump does have the ability to do and would have done. And Trump is now doing it. There's a real chance to reform serious problems in our federal government, particularly the Article 2, Section 1 clause, the vesting clause that says that the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States, not bureaucrats, not agencies, not other institutions, in the president, and let the people decide where they want their country to go. We got to get back to that principle. And it's going to be messy. It's going to be challenging, but I think it's actually really hopeful. I told people, I had just left Capitol Hill working for Tim Huell's camp in 2016, just briefly before that. And I was telling people, I had spent by that time 4 or 5 years in DC. And I said, listen, if Trump is elected, he's going to kick over the trash cans and he's going to reveal what's really going on in Washington, D.C. Like, everyone knows it's bad, but I would tell people, you don't know how bad it really is. I've dealt with this from the inside. It's worse than you can even imagine. And he has shown how bad that is. And that's healthy. when you have these putrid trash cans filled with horrible gunk just sitting off in a corner festering, then you've got a problem just waiting to happen. The only way to clean up the mess is to deal with the trash. And Donald Trump is doing that. But in areas sometimes that I have disagreements with, but the net is very good. It is an American vision. It's not a Trump vision even per se. It is an American vision. I am still blessed and impressed by the fact that he has consistently during the campaign said, and you could tell over time it was absolutely in his heart. He said, they're not just coming after me, they're coming after you. And he was right about that. We have had a bureaucratic state that is disgusted at citizens for some of the reasons we've talked about, some of the issues we've been able to get into today, but far more than that. And we have to reassert ourselves as citizens. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I remember 1977, or 1976, right? That was, when we had that big bicentennial celebration and everything. So for those of you that were not born back then, go see if you can find something. Yeah. I remember how proud people were to be American, even like going through the Carter and then the Reagan administrations, I don't care whether somebody was Democrat or Republican. I felt like people were proud to be American.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hoping will start to resurrect. And I we're not talking about where you're so pro-American that you hate everybody else. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people that are proud of our national anthem, that when the flag goes up, there is that feeling of all the lives that were lost building this great country. Watching all the craziness. I know this is kind of off subject, but it kind of ties in, watching all the craziness with Prince Harry, asking for his, his privacy, his protection and all that. And he's married to an American who wants everybody to treat her like a duchess. And we're like, no, we fought a war. We fought a war, people, right? Yeah. So that we wouldn't have to serve a king. The only king we serve, right, is the great King of Kings. But this is a great country. And so when Trump speaks, I get the impression this man loves the country, and some of the Democrats who are speaking today, I question if they truly love this country or if they just love their position. And maybe that's wrong of me to be so judgmental, but boy, moving the direction of this country, I want to see our country move to go back to being proud of being American.
Well, and I'm not so nice about it. I really believe that on a national level, Democrats, they do not love this country. They do want to change what the country is. And there are very real efforts to twist and turn elections to favor them. And I'm not saying every election's stolen. That's not my point, but to twist and turn the rules, to change them last minute, to make it really difficult to have votes go on for days after, vote counting to go on for days after. I mean, they're breaking down in every way. Democrats, trust in our institutions, assurance in the stability of those institutions to just give a level playing field to everyone. They don't want a level playing field. They want the playing field to serve them every single time rather than having to, deal with truth. And by the way, Republicans sometimes are like that, but in a far different way. It's a very neglectful way and enjoyment of power. As Thomas Massey always talked about that pin that congressmen wear on their lapels, the women, he calls it my precious for those who know the Lord of the Rings reference. It's like after a while of wearing the ring, so to speak, suddenly they're not a hobbit anymore. They turn into this grotesque creature that is unrecognizable from what they previously were. And I've watched this process in Washington, D.C. It's why we need to pull this thing back, and we need to leave power back into the hands of the people. So, and so I appreciate, Eva, everything you've done through the years, and I've always been impressed by it and grateful for the work that you do. And we're going to stay in touch even more closely nowadays as I'm trying to do things all around the country. And by the way, we have someone on our staff, a hourly employee, but is a native from Hawaii. He's literally grew up in Hawaii. So we talked to a few people there, and we'll touch base on some of that. But it'll be great to keep up with that, because I think we've got to bring this whole thing together with people of goodwill who understand what really does matter. We need to keep encouraging people to understand what the Constitution says and what those liberties are and where they come from. and then assert that into the public square, whether it's talking to your friends or getting involved in places. And I know that you are committed to that and your organizations are. And so with that, tell people how they can get a hold of Hawaii Family Forum and anything else that you want to share, just so they can keep in touch with the things that you're doing.
Absolutely. So I'll tell you how to get plugged in with Hawaii Family Forum, but let's just end with Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you? But to love justice and to do mercy and to walk humbly with your God. That's what he requires of us. And so you can find out more about Hawaii Family Forum at visiting us on the web at hawaiifamilyforum.org. It's a one-man shop. I'm the only staff person at Hawaii Family Forum. I've been there a long time. So just drop in, send me a line at eva@hawaiifamilyforum.org and let me know, that you're praying for us. And if there's any way we can reach out across the aisles if we have to make this world a better place.
Now, I'm so glad you brought up Micah 6:8. For me, that's the fundamental verse of my walk with the Lord. And by the way, I do the New American Standard, to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. But that kindness or mercy word is chesed. And it is a very deep meaning word. Really God's loving kindness, this mercy that he has on us. I mean, every one of us are sinners. Romans 3:23 says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Like none of us have any legs to stand on with God. If we compare ourselves to the 10 Commandments, we fail. And if we really think about it a little bit, we know how much we fail. And if we really recognize it well enough, we know how much God hates that sin and failure, which is the whole purpose for Christ to come as a Messiah redeemer for all mankind. But that loving kindness he has is a miracle thing. We have to humbly go before God related to that and seek his loving kindness, but we do need to mirror that as well too. And that does not mean being nice, FYI.
Right.
It means being kind. Jesus would never harm a broken reed, but he went virulently against the Pharisees and their misuse of the people. So, there's a place for this. And this is a good understanding of how we do public policy, as we try to do it inspired by and moved by, as Christians, the Holy Spirit and the truth of God's word. That is the most fundamental thing that we need to do. And Micah 6:8 is a verse everybody should know about. It is, but doing justice. Like we do not do justice in this country right now well enough. It is a real challenge, and we've got to overcome that, because honestly, God hates it. He hates injustice. He hates false balances and tip scales. He won't put up with it. And I pray that his mercy will stay with us, as just happened in November, to try to get out of this problem.
Amen. Amen. Jim, you're really awesome. And if anybody wants to check us out, what's happening here in Hawaii, you can check our show out. We have a podcast on YouTube under Hawaii Family Forum, just on Hawaii things. So, Jim, thank you for all your good work that you're doing.
Well, thanks so much. And we'll put all the information about you in the show notes so people will know how to find out more about you. And Eva, I'm so grateful for you. And I'm glad that we were able to connect and do this, because these are really key issues. And you've been on the cutting edge of fighting these things for a long time. And I think everyone needs to go to hawaiifamilyforum.org, see what you're doing, and then learn more. And if you're in Hawaii, definitely get connected with Eva and help them out, because they can use it. So thanks, Eva, for your time today. So grateful we got to do this.
Yep. Mahalo for your time as well. And blessings to all our listeners and viewers.
Thanks so much. Hey, before we get to some closing thoughts, I just want to thank you for joining us and listening to the Conservative Caucus podcast. Please share this with all your friends. Check out our show notes on the bottom here. You want to follow what Eva Andrade does there in Hawaii. I think if you're in Hawaii, you definitely want to be involved, but definitely follow what they're doing. Help them out. What Eva's doing is amazing work. And so you're going to get links to her organization, links to what we're doing. And then as we develop this show during these opening months of the podcast, your feedback's critical. Please let us know what you think. Contact us at info@theconservativecaucus.org. Also info@conservativeusa.org. Just email us there. Let us know who you would like to have on the show. Give us a little feedback on what you thought you heard and how you liked it. And then please be sure to click and subscribe on your favorite podcast app, on YouTube or Rumble or wherever you're hearing this. And we'll share it with your friends as well also, obviously. So this is a great conversation with Eva Andrade of Hawaii Family Forum. She'll give you her links as well too. And again, it's in the show notes. Here's some final thoughts.